right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am Lindsay Doukopoulos, Associate Director for Educational Development in the Biggio Center here at Auburn University. I have logged a lot of teaching miles in this classroom, which as you can see is great for active learning, a little bit awkward for a panel kind of presentation. But we are very thrilled to have our panelists who will absolutely make it work. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and kind of a little bit about their context and the topic is curricular evolution for AI. So I'm going to invite you all to share something current that you've been working on related to this topic, maybe a lesson. The more specific the example or story, the better, I think. But we'll just kind of go down the line, starting with Todd here from the University of South Alabama, followed by Scott Nokes. Not Richard. Richard must be really good, but we're going to call him Scott today, from Troy University. Chris Basgier from the University Writing Center here at Auburn University, of course, and Justin Carter from the University of North Alabama. So Todd, we'll go ahead and start with you.
My name is Todd Andel. I'm the Dean of the School of Computing at South Alabama. I'm a cybersecurity guy by trade, and so my boss thought it would be great if I was the co-lead of the AI, the AI community across campus. What we're doing at South Alabama in the context of AI community space. We're kind of looking at this from a course perspective, from a research perspective, university operations, as well as USA has a giant healthcare as well. So we're looking at how we can take advantage of advancements in AI. Specifically from the curricular side, as a dean, I obviously have a little bit of impact on, or I hope pressure on my faculty of what type of curriculum you want to be looking at. And that's not always the case, right? So after our first meeting that ACAD up in Auburn, or Huntsville, that we're up there at the first meeting, something that struck me is industry, and specifically the defense industry, for a lot of things to go from my discipline. So we really want people to know how to using AI, right? You might have to well, I don't know, you can't do that. And so with some money actually from APE, we started money from APE. We are actually piloting a program of use AI the program in Python. Right? And we're going to see how that works and how we can integrate that into the training of our students. And that's what our defense industry, folks at our machine are wanting to look at. So that's one thing we're looking at across campus that we're going to look at is what makes sense in each discipline. What type of thing, as opposed to just using AI as a helper, what are the specific things in your discipline? Let's say your business, let's say you're if you know an individual or what types of things really are important. So everything that is maybe get some things that I think correctly in my own school education.
I'm Scott Nokes. I'm the director of the Troy University's AI Board Initiative and professor of medieval literature. And as part of that, I'm teaching freshman composition. We always have teach freshman composition, but I'm starting to teach it this time because we put in this new curriculum, this AI Board curriculum in our freshman comp classes. And since you asked for a very specific story, I'll tell you about something that happened Thursday. So we've been working on voice, on basically dealing with AI output and that kind of hyper-formal, a lot of empty rhetoric voice, and we're working on dealing with it. And so in order to do this, one thing that after we went through sort of all the general principles for a class and a half, we just had Copilot produce for us an essay on a topic, and the topic was we wanted to write an academic review with citations of the TV show Troy University Bachelorette. It's a TV show, one of these bachelorette shows, but it's just based on Troy University. And if you're thinking like, wow, Troy University has that, that's really weird. We don't. It's a totally imaginary show. But we're just coming up with what I thought would be a fun topic to kind of look at like the output and talk about like the voice problems. But it turned into for the students this object lesson in hallucination, because boy, it didn't first protest by saying, I have no information about this. It just generated something, which every source was, of course, fabricated. Every quote was fabricated. Everything was fully hallucinated. And so we focused on voice. That was really what we were doing in that class. But the students did say that they came away realizing that their outlines weren't thorough enough, that when it filled in the blanks, it might do what it did for an entire TV show that only existed in our favorite imaginations.
So again, I'm Chris Basgier. I'm Director of University Writing here at Auburn, which has kind of a two-part mission. So first of all, we're the home of the Miller Writing Center, where writers can come and get one-on-one support with a peer consultant on any kind of writing project at any stage in the writing process. And then we also have a faculty development mission is part of the Writing Across the Curriculum program, helping faculty integrate meaningful writing assignments, effective feedback, peer review, so on and so forth into their courses in ways that are relevant to their disciplines and professions. And so when ChatGPT came on the scene, I was sort of thrust into these conversations much in the same way that Lindsay and the Biggio Center were, particularly because when we're thinking about generative AI, one way of thinking about it is as a literacy technology, right? It's involved in reading and writing. And so that's what I do. So I've done a lot of work on that. So again, like one very specific example that I like to do with faculty, I'll go visit a department and I will find somebody, a researcher in that department, I'll find something they published in a journal, and I'll extract a piece of data from that journal. I'll give it to ChatGPT and I'll say, I'm writing for this journal, and here's my research question, hypothesis, whatever, and here's some data that I have. Please write the narrative explanation of this data. And then I'll give it back to the faculty and say, compare them, right? And inevitably what they see is like, oh, the ChatGPT version sounds really polished, but actually it usually struggles with anything that resembles interpretation or idea generation or prioritizing certain aspects of the data over others in order to tell a narrative that's in response to a question. Those are all writing issues, right? Instead, it'll pretty much just summarize the data comprehensively without any sense of the meanings, right? And that's often an aha moment for them to say, oh, okay, so first of all, I probably don't need to be as afraid. And second of all, maybe I need to be working with my students to help them understand these differences between what the experts do and what the non-expert technology does. And so that then generates some really fun conversations about like, what does writing mean in your discipline? How can you teach it? And then what role could AI play in helping highlight and emphasize that kind of thing?
Hey everybody, I'm Justin. I'm a professor at the University of North Alabama. I work in the business department and teach supply chain operations management. I teach business strategy as well. And apparently I just found out yesterday I'll teach an AI course as well. So mainly, my involvement in this, I came from industry. I spent 20 years before joining the university. And, my role in this has been primarily bringing businesses in and use cases. So that's what I'm working really hard to do, is to actually bring in, we have Walmart involved right now. We've got TVA, we've got Alabama Power pulled in, we've got a couple of other companies that we've gone to and said, hey, we're all trying to run this together. We're all struggling through this. Can you give us projects, case studies, data, things that you're working on, and can we incorporate that in the classroom? And so that's what I'm doing right now. So for example, Walmart gave us a bunch of data. We're using it for inventory management. And we're showing them, okay, let's actually look at, not just, this is kind of how it works, but no, this is literally how it works, because it's literally what companies are doing. So that's the big initiative that we have right now at UNA and getting clients.
All right, thank you for the introduction. So since some of you have answered our kind of first volley question, how have you been experimenting with AI integrations in your own courses? If you didn't touch on that in your opening, please feel free to touch on that question. We also want to kind of dig into what kinds of learning have you seen AI enable for your students, and where are your students struggling when it comes to learning with these tools?
Well, at this point, with the class that we're developing in computer, we haven't necessarily got to that point yet where we have students in the classroom. We're in a development term. So we've actually been including students in what do they want to see in class? So we've been having open sessions, so we can start to really try to develop this from the ground up. And also, we're not trying to develop this as if you didn't have any experience in the discipline medium. Right, so that'll be another thing. Obviously, if we would want to incorporate this long term to undergraduates, it's going to be have to be, very discipline specific as we go along. But we're thinking more even anybody on campus that maybe doesn't have this background, and maybe this is how you start coding in the future. So that's kind of the difference that we think students right now, when they come into a introductory programming class, they're focusing on learning the syntax, and they don't necessarily maybe follow the algorithm. They don't understand the algorithms, they're focusing too much on the actual program. And so if we flip that, it's kind of what we're looking at doing in this class is you learn how to actually evaluate what you want the program to do without really worrying about the mechanics of how the program is going to be written. Right? And now once you understand that, and that's what we're hoping to see, once you understand that, then you start seeing that difference, right, move along, and you start then understanding, what are the syntactical limitations or things of that nature. And from a potential gen ed perspective, that's huge, right? Something that might need, we have one professor on campus right now that has done this on his own in genetics. So those folks need to know how to pull up genetic sequences, and they don't necessarily have to spend the time to go learn how to program, right? And so we're starting to see that they actually have useful programming output to help them in the discipline for that. And again, that's kind of what we're looking at the model that we're looking at. Obviously, long term, when you look at, let's say a defense contractor is going to hire a graduate specifically to write software engineering or any other computing specialties. Obviously, generative AI is going to write a monolithic system for an aircraft or a weapon system or that. So in that case, the students are going to have to then focus on, you know how to use AI to generate this. How do I stitch this together to build this large system? And I think that's going to be key to this. There's a prompt engineering that really goes to that integration, which are really computing and software engineering things to begin with. But it's going to be those things that are more important.
So I'm in the English department, and but we're probably also, so I have first-hand experience, but we're also probably the leading department in my university. Because we have a lot of people who've been working in this space for some years now. And so we launched our AI for composition curriculum for freshman composition classes in this fall. And we launched it as an option for faculty to use. I would say maybe 2 of our full-time faculty aren't using it. Our adjuncts are much less likely to take it up, although they'll probably be forced rather than gunpoint at being point at some point here. And so we knew at the beginning of this that we were going to, those of us who use it, of course, are professional writers, editors, in some cases publishers. And so we knew that that students were going to struggle with this in some ways that we could expect, in some ways that maybe would be unexpected. The ways that we expected were correct, I think. And so we're working on these issues. And so there's 2 elements. The first element is on the level of prompt engineering, and that has to do with teaching students how to write very, very rigorous outlines. And the little tiny, formal outlines that you learned when you were in middle school with the Roman numeral 1 and the capital A. And the reason to do that is to really maintain the human control over it. So the AI is not having to interpret what you're asking it to do, but it really understands it because you've given it to it in this formal, formulaic way. It understands exactly what you're doing. That's a very old-fashioned, old-timey. We could pull our 90-year-old professors out of retirement, and they could teach that well. And the students, to my surprise, have actually taken to that a little better than they thought that they might, even though it's a very old-fashioned thing. I found that in the first assignments they didn't. They were like, "Why am I doing this?" And then when they saw their first output, their response was like, "Oh, I see why I have to do that." The challenge that we're having is on the output, because we're teaching voice. Now, teaching voice to students is something that we've done for, I mean, I'm sure we've done it for a century and a half at Troy. But we've been teaching voice to upper level English majors, to people who do a lot of reading and do a lot of writing and have an understanding of what their voice is, where they want their voice to go. And where our students are being really challenged is when you are 19 years old, you're not an English major, you definitely did not do the mandatory reading when you were in high school. The last book that you read to completion involved a large red dog named Clifford. When you're in that situation, it's hard to develop this. And so one thing that we're struggling with is, it's one thing to teach voice to upper level English majors. It's another thing to teach voice to people who haven't really done that much reading, haven't really thought about reading that much or writing that much. And we're not concerned about their writing and suddenly find themselves in the age of generative AI, realizing if I don't want to produce things that sound like a robot and want to be employable, I need to learn how to do this. Coming from what's really a standing start in the case. And that's, I think, the challenge that we face. And I think when we revise the curriculum at the end of this academic year, probably the place that we're really going to focus.
So when you say voice, when you talk about teaching that, again, business guy here, so can you define that? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so everyone kind of writes with a voice, right? So if you handed me, back in the olden days before if a student turned in a paper, I immediately knew that it was plagiarized because I read two of their other papers and they had a voice, it's distinct. And, it's like they showed up with a different face for class one day. That's not the problem. The problem is that the output, whether you're talking OpenAI stuff or Anthropic stuff or certainly Gemini or whatever, is it tends to be this kind of hyper formal, I often equate it to a kind of board HR manager voice that lacks human authenticity. It doesn't reflect the student, but also doesn't engage the reader. And there are very few business purposes for there are very few uses for someone who produces things that no one will ever read. Or that, as I tell my students, which is one of the few things that they've really taken from this, is no one will ever pay you to write something they can get a robot to write them for free. And that's the thing that gets their attention.
For $20 a month.
That's right.
I think also one other complication with voice is you can prompt the AI to take on a voice, and it usually way overshoots the mark to the point of being a caricature.
Yeah.
And so getting them to see that as another kind of layer of the complication, how do you then bring that in to make it sound more realistic, sound more like you, etc. You could say, make it sound like a 20-something, Gen Z, and it will, but it's not going to be realistic.
I have a friend who's a novelist, and her husband is. I probably can't identify. Her husband is in charge of the tailored software solutions for a major international software consulting company. So just for fun, he took all the tens and tens of thousands of words, hundreds of thousands of words that she's published, and trained up an AI to try to get to write it. Even with her output, it comes out as a kind of character from that. You're right.
On the writing center side of things, one of the things that we've been contemplating is what is the potential impact of generative AI on tutoring, especially tutoring of writing. And I mean, you probably heard yesterday, today, people kind of sprinkling in, well, you could have AI tutors, right? And so then I'm like, are we going to have to shut the writing center? Let's probe this a little bit farther. So one of my GAs, Mohammed Umar, and I have done an experiment together. I'm going to go in reverse order. So the last thing we did was we got a paid version of Packback's writing lab. How do you know about Packback? Yeah, okay, so it's a educational technology. It's primarily known for being kind of an AI enhanced discussion board, but they've created this writing lab that's billed as an AI writing assistant. And so you upload your writing to it, and then there are so various kinds of functions that you can prompt it to ask you to look at. And so he put his writing in there, and then I was just observing this. And, you know, it'll flag your grammar and that sort of thing. And then it has these chats. And the chats are, what we found are really, they have like very heavy guardrails that have been put on them, because PackBack doesn't want their AI to write the paper for the student, which makes sense. Except that the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that it won't give any actual actionable advice on the writing. So for example, he prompted it to say, I'm struggling with my conclusion. How can I write an effective conclusion to this paper that I'm working on? And it comes back and says, what do you want to say to your audience? What do you want them to know about your topic? He's like, I'm not sure yet. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Can you help me with that? And it comes back with a variation of the same question. Now, if we actually did that in the writing center space, the consultant is going to say, okay, cool, let's start jotting down some ideas. Let's talk about like, what are, you know, how do you set up your introduction? How can we use that as a springboard for returning to your conclusion or whatever, right? And it would be a little more directive, and it would actually get some feedback on it. So that was kind of a frustration. And it got to the point where he literally put a period in the chat, and it still kept coming back with the same question. And what we realized is that the AI was not actually reading and responding to his writing, right? It was gleaning a few things from his text, mainly topical things, and using that to drive what was otherwise a pretty pre-formulated chat. So I think the promise of AI tutors is a bit oversold right now. The other thing that we did was we used ChatGPT, and instead of having it give feedback on his writing, we had it, I pretended to be a peer consultant, and we had it as a guide on the side for me. So we did one of these really robust, structured and scaffolded prompts, and here it performed way better, right? Because it was able to lead me through an appointment, asking good questions about his audience's purpose, the genre, the discipline, especially technical things that I maybe didn't know about, things of building science, and business engineering, right? But even then, there came a point where I kind of had to go back to what I already knew about how to give good feedback on writing. And a kind of takeaway here is that I think when we're integrating AI into our courses, we want to make sure we're scaffolding it in such a way that it allows students to start to build mastery of whatever the content and area that we're teaching. My shorthand for this is AI is really good if you already know what you're doing. But if you don't already know what you're doing, then it can very well, very easily lead you astray or not give you something that you need that you don't know you need. So that's all to say. I don't think that peer tutors are going to be replaced anytime soon.
All right, so I couldn't have asked for a better segue. I want to talk about, because I mean, it bleeds straight into it. And I think the challenge that we're having right now is threading the needle between it being a tool that we're going to use together and work with together, and it being a crutch and providing answers. So when you were talking about the tutoring and using it in that way, I think, honestly, I think we're being extremely naive about, we've got a policy statement somewhere in there about you can use it for brainstorming, and you can use it for this, and you can use it for that. I don't think that's realistic, because I think people tend to immediately default to give me the answer, do the thing, give me the output. All my students get a lot of the output, give me the output. But you said it perfectly. Like, if you don't understand supply chain, if you don't understand the dynamics behind that, then even though it's giving you an answer, you don't understand the answer. So you can't engage with it and work with it. So I think where we're trying to thread the needle is teaching our students, and this is a challenge, I'm not saying we're there, we're trying to get there, is how to partner, how to work with it, how to be an engaged party in this process, and not, let me teach you a couple of prompts to get an output. And that's what really bugs me, is when people, and I see things on LinkedIn, I see things all over the place. They're like, here's how you get the end. No, like, I don't want you to tell me what X is. I want to be a part of that process to define X together. Does that make sense? So I don't know if I said that well, but that's where we are. That's where we're struggling.
I could jump off of that. Again, one of the things that I work with faculty a lot of, in designing AI and data assignments is actually shifting away from thinking about AI as tool and towards thinking about AI as an object of inquiry. So yeah, let's all go to ChatGPT and prompt it about this supply chain issue, and now let's critique its answer, right? Let's analyze it and let's say, what is it getting right? What is it missing? What if we threw in some new variables? How does that change our analysis of the situation? And that sort of thing, right? So it moves us away from relying on a crutch and instead forces the students back in that critical thinking mindset.
But just to keep that going, like, one problem I think doing that is you're saying AI might be wrong. So if it's ever better, which I don't know if y'all played with like Pokemon or any of the other, but like it's getting better and better and better. So then we're losing that argument because it may get more accurate. Like right now, the hallucinations are much less. The new versions has plenty of citations that will actually point back to real articles. So then we're like, well, we argued that you don't want to use it that way because it might be wrong. Well, now it's right. But no, like, don't just prompt it for an answer, like work with it.
Right, and I should clarify that, like, I don't propose this as like a I got to ChatGPT moment. Instead it's more so, let's look together at how it arrived at its answer.
And I think what you said was like, that was part of like, if you don't understand it, and you're trying to get an answer from it, like if I've never read a book and I tell it to summarize the book for me, I don't get the missing parts. And I don't know the missing parts.
Yeah.
Well, sorry for that. So just to really back up what you're saying, I see all the time this advice to use it to brainstorm for you, this kind of thing. And our approach, certainly my approach, but our approach as a department is that is exactly backwards from how you should use it. The way that AI is functioning, these natural language processors, is to essentially try to act as human as possible. And the way they do this is by acting as average as possible. It's like winning on Family Feud. You don't win on Family Feud by being smart. You win on Family Feud by being with the most in a family of the most average, boring, uncreative people you can be.
The survey says, is that
And being able to split your $10,000 winnings between the 5 or 6 of you. And so the problem is twofold. I think one is the human control, like both ethically, but also in terms of the value output. The human creativity, the human control is the valuable part of it. It's the only part that matters. The rest of it is, it should be functioning on the behest of the human, hopefully not making mistakes because it's doing it well. Because when you try to get it to come up with the ideas for you, to come up with the human side of it for you, it's going to try to come up with the most average thing that it can, because that feels the most human to it. Thus, it's going to come up with the least useful, or perhaps least marketable from a student standpoint, output that it could have.
Another problem that I think with that, especially when we talk about that, I'm sorry. For those of you online, I'll get better. One of that's a great point. Part of that is like through the learning process, like struggling and getting things wrong. Getting things wrong is part of the learning. And I don't think we're close to a point where it can allow you to do that. Now, I think that's another thing that we're kind of struggling with is, getting so precise in the output we're able to get. Can I go down the rabbit hole and, explore those things and maybe find out something that we wouldn't have known?
So we are also, this is a live event. So if you all have questions, as this conversation is sort of building in interesting ways. Yeah, please.
So I have a question for you, Richard, about, yes, I'm sorry. I think I'm loud enough, but yeah, for some.
Resume.
Yes, there we go. So I have a question for you about that new curriculum for composition. You say that's AI forward. And you said that most of the faculty and adjuncts in the program actually use the curriculum.
Most of the full-time faculty, sorry,
Do you need this?
we're not gonna get that. We're not better than- most of the full-time faculty are, I don't know. I think I shouldn't say some of our adjuncts are, but very few of them are, you know, the less connected you are, the more it's the one class you're teaching for us. Do I want to learn something new?
So my question actually is not about students or the idea of voice, but about product development. What kind of professional development these faculty members and adjuncts and anyone who's teaching the curriculum was offered.
Yeah.
And how extensive that was, how the buy-in among faculty. So tell me more about this.
So a little bit of institutional history might be necessary here. So Troy's we've been many years in the online ed game when I started there, which was just under 22 years ago. And so our faculty are already, in terms of technology generally, our faculty and our students are actually pretty comfortable using it. So we have, I think, less resistance. We have a lot more early adopters for almost any kind of technological innovation. The kind of heuristic I like to use is like, when the pandemic came, we missed no classes. You know, I just sent out on spring break, I sent out a message saying, hey, we're gonna do class online for the rest of the semester, then we'll figure out, and all the students were there online. The next, the next class meeting. So we had. So our experience might not translate to every school, especially ones that have a lot of resistant faculty. So what we did is we put together, in my department, we put together a group of faculty who teach those lower level classes, the small group, and we basically just worked to develop this curriculum. And then what we did to develop the faculty was we had a meeting at the beginning of the semester, and we presented it to them. We keyed it, as closely as possible to the way our existing curriculum was. We also, for them, we created very plain, white text or a black text on white frames, PowerPoints for every lesson. So if there was something that they didn't have, here's a basic framework for you. So you don't have to develop new PowerPoints, your assignments. We also developed a sample rubric for them and said, if you want to adopt this rubric, this will be a rubric for you. And you don't have to take this at all. And then what we promised, and we have since been doing is, and we'll have regular meetings where we kind of talk about this. We have four that are scheduled throughout the semester. So we just had a faculty forum last week to kind of talk, the faculty who are doing this, talk about how it's going, what they're experiencing so far with it. So they really started off with a kind of vanguard of a couple people, and then presenting it to the faculty as an option, and then now this semester and next semester getting feedback on how it's going, and then we'll no doubt revise it. So if you're like, well, why wouldn't it be adjuncts? Well, the adjuncts are required to be at that faculty meeting, but they don't come. They don't show up virtually, and they don't get fired because they're just there to teach one class.
So kind of along the lines with the faculty development, I'm curious, we've been talking very generally about AI, but you all come from very different disciplines, with maybe Scott and Chris having a lot of overlap there. But what are the disciplinary skills or the disciplinary specific STEM, humanities, social sciences, things coming out that you're seeing in your teaching?
So this is actually kind of interesting. You would think that the more technology folks, the computing folks, would be open arms to both online and obviously in the sake of AI. And it's almost kind of the opposite. These are the folks that are almost the anti. All right. So we got kind of the opposite issue that Richard has. Most of our stuff is brick and mortar, right? So when the pandemic came, it was like the sky has fallen, and all of a sudden we learned something, and something came good out of the experience. So we learned how to at least teach in in a hybrid synchronous format, right? And not even really talking about AI yet. So that's just giving you kind of the background of the opposite side of that spectrum of getting faculty on board. And so we're starting to see our equivalent of the Biggio Center, our Intermission Learning Center. I know we have a poster, I think, in the poster section today that ours does. It look at some of the faculty development they're doing, but again, it's more of a volunteer basis for the folks that are interested in looking at this. And so I think there's still a big chasm on our campus of in versus out, right, from that aspect. And again, even me as in the computing thing, I'm really trying to focus my faculty on, what this means for our future if we don't embrace it. So that's really kind of thing. And I equivalent it back to what we learned in, with using Zoom. From that, and we technology, we finally got a couple of technologies. Now we've actually have really basically a synchronous online option in our doctoral program, right? So I have doctoral students that can be in the classroom, it's still in their class time, but they're in Huntsville versus in Mobile. And they felt more comfortable joining our doctoral program, say with some of our master's graduates, they had already advisors in place. And that's now opening up something bigger to us than we really imagine. It's still, face-to-face class, but it's just that you don't have to be here. And just getting the faculty on board with that was significant. And now but we can kind of use those same type of steps now from a faculty development standpoint to move into this area of generative AI. Moving into that. The other thing that I see is I think the culture needs to change a little bit. So like in the research world, so we're doing a lot of research, and so we have annual research training requirements. And I'm one that hate required training, right? And my faculty would really hate it if they heard me talk about required training. But we've already brought up even on our AI committee on campus is just like we require in the responsible conduct of research annual training. We may have to have the same type of thing with generative AI. You can't just go to one training class and be an expert. Tools are changing every day, and you need to understand as you do it, then you start to learn more things. And so I think that'll be a big portion of that as well.
See, I got it. All right. So one of the things I see, like especially from that, I think it's kind of over time, higher ed has gotten a reputation of being the high end industry. And I think right now what I'm seeing is kind of a shift to where, we're trying to get in lockstep. And, I'm not saying we're there, it's just something we're working towards because now you don't have a choice. I mean, you have to move at the speed of how, what business is doing to even be relevant. And before, I don't know if I should say it, like there were some. I love my university very much. There was some similarity in the course that I took when I was an undergraduate, and then when I started teaching the course, and that was alarming. It's like, wow, things have updated, times have changed, but now we're aggressive. Like every semester, we're looking at how fast things are evolving and moving. So I'd say the best thing that I see right now in business is the understanding that our courses can't stay the same. We've got to keep them updated. We've got to stay ahead of this. We've got to keep moving. We've got to, if you teach accounting, if you teach finance, if you teach marketing, everybody, you can't rely on the old material because it really is. After the semester is over, it's old, and you have to figure out what else is going on. So that's one of the things that I'm excited about. Yeah, this is what it's true.
I think one of the things I'm seeing in working with faculty across many disciplines is a realization, kind of the inverse of what you're talking about, not the opposite, but the inverse, which is we can't get caught up in trying to teach a coverage model of curriculum anymore because the material is changing too fast. And so people are moving, I think starting to see a need to move towards bigger picture conceptual thinking. So I'm hearing engineers talk about design thinking and how they're really trying to lean into design thinking is the thing that they're teaching, not the specifics of a thermodynamics equation. Right? They'll teach that, it's relevant, but that's not really the goal. The goal is how to think like an engineer. Or I was working with a faculty member in human development and science who teaches basically a course on families. I can't remember the name of it exactly. And there's this really tricky concept for her students to learn, which is that there's no one right way to make a family. And because they came up in a family, and so it's very naturalized to say like that's how a family is, right? And so that she's actually has been able to bring AI into the mix and have them have debates with AI about different kinds of family structures, and the goal of being like there is no wrong family structure, there are just different structures, right? They're culturally dependent and so on and so forth. And then it helps them wrestle with that bigger picture concept. And so I think that's a good move because it's much more putting a lot more emphasis on the thinking. Whereas the content, I mean, that goes back to like they can get content from anywhere at this point in time. But what it means to think like an engineer or a business person or a therapist or whatever, that's much more complex and context based and et cetera.
To piggyback off what you said about people in STEM often being more resistant, one of the complaints that I've been hearing in my role from our computer science faculty is that you can get AI to write functional code for you, but it's not elegant, and it's going to be, they figure, about 5 to 10% longer, which means 5 to 10% more time to process it. And their concern is both, first one of the students are producing code that they don't understand what it's doing. And then the second one is what happens when all the code is produced is 5 to 10% longer and everything takes 5 to 10% longer to do. And so that's certainly a concern that they have.
So, when we think about the internet came out in what, early 2000, late, whenever the internet came out, you don't know. But it changed the way that we talked about teaching and learning, and it changed, like the keynote this morning, it changed what college was for. You used to have to go to college to get the information in the libraries or in the heads of the experts. And now with the internet, we can access that wherever. How do you think AI is going to impact how teaching and learning kind of shifts, the way we think about what the purpose of teaching or higher education is really for, and really pulling down into your own disciplines? I mean, what are the core things that AI is, the skills that become more obviously important in the age of AI to teach your students?
So Richard was saying about the reluctance of computer science folks, and then I think that you see it's true. He just talked about this idea of efficiency, and so I think that's part of it. Where one of the things that obviously is a key thing in computer science or IT or anyone that's doing any coding really is you go back to this efficiency thing, but then you go back to this testing. So you've got testing, and does this validate and verify against your original statement or your statement purpose? And that in itself, I think, will be more important because again, we might rely on the AI to generate the original code. We got to start looking at is, does this really solve the problem we need to solve? Right. And then also where do we probably going to get this efficiency? So again, manually, I mean, I'm still really old school guy. I think that everyone should learn how to program in assembly. That's all this do, at an achievement level. But that's what that was issue. One of the high level compilers, right? From high level languages, that effectively is what we lost, some of the potential efficiency, at least in the early ones, right? And now they're getting much better. So we're kind of going through that same process. I've explained it to some of my faculty as well too, is when was the last time that you wrote your own printf statements? Okay, so this is a library. We think of this concept of how we're relying today on libraries, is none of us has probably written the internals of a printf statement, pulling in from an input statement in an input stream. None of us has written that code. We're all using libraries. It's kind of the same thing, right? How do we learn to use libraries and how do we rely on those? And it's kind of that same aspect. One thing I'll say that maybe even what people are saying is, here's the answer and how do they come up with that answer. I kind of also equate this to, the days that when most of us probably got our undergrads, some professors were nice enough to assign answers that actually, or questions that actually had answers in the book. And the thing is there is figure out how you got to that answer, right? So this is really nothing new. We're going back to the old standard of here's the answer, potential answer. And you tell me how you got here, and if it is the wrong answer, then maybe you have figured out what the problem is along the way. So I think if we can kind of can even go backwards a little bit and rely on a different aspect that some of us knew when we were younger, and did that.
I think, you're asking about the future of education and, kind of what it means, right?
No big deal.
Yeah, it's small things. So of course, we have to be modest about our future claims here. But I would say that really, I think the two things I see in the immediate future is, the first one is this issue of thinking like something. Like thinking how someone in this profession is, and that a lot of education is going to be maybe a lot like law school is. For law school, they don't really teach you how to operate in the courtroom, they teach you how to think like a lawyer. And I think we're going to see a lot more of undergraduate education, particularly looking like how to think like someone who is an expert in this field. In terms of how we deploy that, I mentioned, you talk about going back to the old ways, right? I mentioned, teaching outlining like I learned in middle school, and we just had a faculty member, who's definitely not, I would not call her a Luddite, she's certainly not anti-AI, but talk about how to deploy oral exams. If that's what you need for a particular kind of authentic assessment in a class, and what's the best way to do that. Bringing back something which I didn't do much of in undergraduate. That was the generation before. And so I do think we're going to have, as part of this learning how to think like this, and having some of the tools that we would otherwise take care of some things that we otherwise would have kind of just learned how to do as part of the field, is then the things that need to be assessed through that is things like going back to the old ways, so that our honest students could teach those.
If you'll allow me to wax utopian. Another thing that we might want to go back to or rekindle is the idea of the university without walls, right? I think a really lovely idea for a future would be, instead of departments and curriculum and classes and all of the things that we deal with now, instead we have collectives of people with different specializations and expertise working together on problems and apprenticing students along the way. And being embedded in communities and organizations as they're doing so, learning from one another and leveraging AI as a tool and exponential growth of our reasoning and analytical powers. I think something like that could be super cool. I would love to see what that would look like.
So the question itself, like, I've been asked that question a couple of times, and like it kind of phrases it in a way where like we don't have agency over it. Like, how is it going to unfold in front of us? Like, where can chart a path forward? And I think having discussions like this, and this has been actually, I've learned a lot. And we're in control of where we take this and what higher ed is going to look like in the future. It's not going to happen to us. It's going to happen for us, and we'll decide what that looks like. So I do think I have some say in that. And where I would like to see it go again is talking to businesses. What do you need? We can supply it. Tell me what you need. Tell me what we need to do. Talk to our students. What are you looking for from us? And then providing that. It's really that simple.
So we've only got 5 minutes left. I'm going to do a twist on the panel, which is where I'm going to invite the panelists to ask a question for our group here that they want to build these communities, to lead the way forward. What are the things that we need to do? So something that might invite the next step, or for us to work on the questions that you all are wrestling with right now. That was not a prepared question, so if you need a moment, we can make Chris go first.
This is kind of an interesting question, because I was watching a podcast from the provost of a, not my university, but a different university, and they almost implied that. And I bet their faculty were, their English faculty were kind of, if they saw that, they were probably not very happy, that they implied that doesn't person really need to know how to write with you. Right, what's the, and so, but what his point was is, we need to figure out what someone needs to do in tomorrow's age. And then train them to do that, right? And his point was is, that may or may not, you know, your employer may not care if you know how to write a 10-page essay and, you know, it includes all the context. So that's kind of, I think, I mean, what do you guys, I mean, obviously I got folks that are in writing business but that took me kind of as a shock, and then it started me to think. And I think that's what pushed us, as a, you know, that you can go into this thing that we're toying with this, you know, how do we program the other way around with starting that, it was kind of the same thing, and also the you know, someone right from the defense industry saying, yes, we want to hire people like that because they're gonna be more efficient. Right, so that's kind of, I guess, my question.
Okay, perfect.
These questions are for us, these are our stats.
For them, yeah.
Us at each other.
Yeah.
Did you wanna?
I mean, does anyone?
We have 3 minutes left.
So,
Very good.
so I think historically, oh, sorry, you wanna answer?
No.
When I think about the historic moment, because I'm a medievalist, I think about the coming of the printing press. And in England in the 1470s, you had a guy named William Caxton who was associated with the printing press in English. And his idea was, in the future, there's going to be big, beautiful things. So like he first produced the Lemonte Artur, these kind of big, beautiful prestige manuscripts. And one of his apprentices went off. They had a good relationship, but became a competitor. His name was Wynkyn de Worde, his actual name, and Wynkyn de Worde. And he thought, no, it's what we later started called jobbers, which would be more like the print shop, like print off cheap things really, really quickly. It's what you're going to be doing. And it wasn't clear what was going to win out. And although we normally talk about the printing press and more about Caxton, the truth is the jobbers won. Like that's really the model. And so what I would suggest to people is, I always suggest to people that they talk to people in industry. What are your needs now and what is being used now? But I also would urge you, or would say, ask you, when you do that, ask for more than one answer, not for the answer, because you could be talking to Wynkyn de Worde and you could be talking to William Caxton.
A question that we should all ask ourselves is, what are we actually willing to let go of? I'll just leave it at that.
You're gonna make me follow that?
You need to hold on to.
No, okay, so I'll piggyback off that and you know, one of the things that I talk about with my students quite a bit is AI shouldn't be used for everything. And it does concern me quite a bit that there's not more conversation around that, about the healthy things in our lives that we have being challenged, taking things slow, taking our time to read through something. And these are things that aren't being discussed as far as just because it works, just because we have it, doesn't necessarily mean you use it or that it's good for you in the long term. So, you know, telling my students, like, I love AI for inventory management, for quality control, for production, for, you know, manufacturing. Don't use it to write a letter to your friend. Like, don't use it to write a thank you letter. That should be handwritten. Don't use it for everything. And I think there needs to be more conversation about what those things are. And yeah.
All right, thank you. We are at time, so thank you, panelists. And we all have 5 minutes. Turn around this afternoon.
Yeah, that's fine.